Come on. All right, finally. It looks like Twitch chat is going to just barf all day and not actually load, but I'll go ahead and tell the world that we're streaming anyway. I'm streaming game dev, gonna do some debris work, as you might guess. Paste. Think chat is broken. Paste. And then we'll pop on over to here. So I had some annoying things going on here. All of my various things decided to log me out. Twitch logged me out in the middle of the stream last time, and that's why I was having such a hard time. And the similar problems with Unity, they logged me out, and Twitch changed my stream key, so I don't know. But for some reason, chat is not loading. Come on, chat. Twitch is just like telling me it can't connect to chat. Maybe that's something that is universal and nobody can chat on Twitch today. Or maybe it's just me. I have no way of knowing. I mean, I can open up my channel on a different browser and just see whether or not I can see chat there. Okay, so I can see chat in an alternate browser, but not in Chrome? Is it a problem with my dashboard? I know what it is. Twitch said that I was going to get signed up for the new beta, and their new beta is broken. Okay, that's fine. I will just go over to my channel proper and test. Okay, so I can see the chat as long as I'm not looking at my dashboard, because why would I want to look at the dashboard? Ha! Don't be silly. Well, whatever. So this was a rough start, but what I'm going to be doing today is fixing this stuff. The edge of these, it looks terrible. I'm trying to figure out a way to make it look less terrible. But the problem is I have to use just one or two meshes, and I can't distort them because I have to use a shader to just use some GPU instancing, and they can't use different meshes for that. What I can do, however, is have a vertex shader which adjusts verts according to, say, a mesh color. So, by the way, I still have no idea whether chat worked. Tell me if you can see my test chat. Who knows? So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to stop using these, at least for a while, and we're going to explore the idea of using the edge of the mesh itself and then, adjusting it with a shader. Elbow Etchy says he can see it. Okay, good. So it's just that the dashboard's broken. The core Twitch channel seems to be running fine. Great. So this is what it looks like right now without anything else. And our two options are we can have little plates that get stuck on, or we can have just paint the mesh in various colors to allow a shader to adjust the verts and create some damage. Now the question is, I don't actually know how to do tessellation in a Unity shader. Let me just see. I should have looked this up earlier, but I've been fighting trying to get this stream to work at all for the past half hour. Okay, so it looks like if I want to do tessellation, it's a surface shader? Where's the tessellation? Is it just vert disp? Is that like an automatic tessellation thing? Vertex modifier disp samples the displacement map and moves the verts along their normals. It uses a custom vertex data input structure instead of the default. Okay, so there is a... I'm trying to figure out this. The sample here isn't telling me how much tessellation is going on or how to set it. I don't know whether I want to rely on tessellation. So here's the question that I don't know the answer to. When I do tessellation, is that something that is supported by a lot of the target computers? Because I need them to be able to do GPU instancing. Is it like if they can do GPU instancing, they can do tessellation, or is the overlap pretty sparse? I don't really know. But to be honest, I don't have to do tessellation. I could just create the verts and just have them do their thing. The only thing I'm not sure of is these sample tessellation shaders don't really show me how to control the tessellation. I think there's probably some magic where you set a value and it tessellates somewhat automatically, and they're not making it clear. I just don't know enough about it. I'll have to look it up later. So what we're going to do is we're just going to manually create the edges and have them be nice and dense so that I can do some coloration and warp them. The problem is, how do I warp them randomly? And I think that I'll use world coordinates because these things aren't going to be drifting. They're quite big. So what we're going to want to do here is create a tessellatable object. And it's not going to be tessellated. We're just going to start with something that's not tessellated. But, well, the easiest thing to do is to grab this outer edge and then duplicate it, right? And that gives us a separate object, which we'll just separate out for now. And this can be the edge that we're going to tessellate. And we can just select everything and extrude and then shrink it in if we would like on everything but the z-axis, right? Like so. And that gives us something that's vaguely acceptable in terms of overall shape. Sorta. We can always change it a little bit by selecting this interior surface and scaling it up and adjusting it a little bit to try and make it a little thinner, you know? Because what we're trying to do is get something that feels like, even if it wasn't being ragged, it would still feel like a reasonable edge for this to have. And right now the problem is that this interior is not quite at the same level. All right, so something like this, just for starters, right? And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and paint it. Now later on, we may use this painting as a basis for tessellation, but since I don't know how to do tessellation yet, we won't. Instead, we'll go ahead and vertex paint it, and we're going to go ahead and leave white as unmodified, and then we're going to have black be modified. So we're going to just paint the edge all around. I'm sure there's a faster way to paint an edge loop, but I'm not real familiar with Blender's vertex paint tools, so we're just kind of winging it. It might actually be easier to paint the things that are remaining white, but that's, you know, whatever. Because we don't want the inner edge to tessellate. If we have that happen, then it will ripple in a way which detaches it from the surface, and that's no good. So it looks like the problem I've got here is that these verts are not all merged together properly, and they're going to split into different sets. And that's not going to be good. You can see what I'm talking about here. This crisp edge means that there's two sets of verts. And the reason for that is because of the normals, the surface normals that we're using. If we smooth it, that'll go away. But we will have to worry about the fact that we're going to have like smoothed edges everywhere. Come on. Right now I'm just trying to see, there's a lot of things that go wrong when you try and paint, and it's hard to, I'm sure there is a way to do this properly. It's just that Blender never really helps make that stuff very clear. Like that, is that really white? I guess it is. Well, I think that's correct. Oh, there's some more places that need to be pitch black. Black, like my mood. Okay, come on. Is that really? I guess that is correct. There's a microphone directly in front of my face. I've been slouching, and it's, I need to stop slouching and actually look at the screen properly. There we are. So this is a perfectly smooth-faced set of verts, but it's not actually being smooth here in the paint system, so I don't think that was worthwhile. Go ahead and do it with the standard auto smooth, and we'll work that out later. So what we really need to do is just have this be quite a bit more dense than it currently is, and that's why we painted it beforehand. It's easier to paint when there are fewer points to worry about. So the biggest and easiest way to have this happen is to select this inner edge and then subdivide it. And we can subdivide it any way we'd like with any number of things we like, but we're going to want to switch this over to try mode, or Unity will get horribly confused. And we'll just increase the number of cuts. But you can see that we're getting a lot of density inside, and that's really not what we want. The density we would like should be entirely on these edges and not between them. If we were to subdivide the edges, you can see that that subdivides rather more nicely. So in this way, we can get it to subdivide as we would like without creating a lot of extra internal fluff. Perfect. So now we have a ready-to-rumble edge that has some density to it. See? I'm not sure that density is actually enough, but it's good for a first start. So we're going to go and switch into object mode and then combine this back with the parent. No, sorry. Isn't it Control J? There it is. And you can see that the parent doesn't have an auto smoothing set to on. We're going to go ahead and turn it on. What we're also going to do is remove doubles, and that will solder these edges back together, which will keep it looking correct when we actually do the stuff in the game. All right, so when we go into paint mode, you should be able to see that the only things that have been painted are the edge that we want to distort. So we're going to go into Unity and make a shader that explicitly offsets those values. Now that said, I'm not sure how to do that. I have some examples of how to tessellate, but I need an example of how to offset. So, well, I guess it is probably going to be a vertex shader, isn't it? Vertex offset shader Unity. Give me an example, somebody. I have a shader that applies an offset to each vertex. Modifying vertex position in a surface shader. You're going to need to transform the vertex into world space, do the processing, and then transform it back into local space. I don't have to do that, but that's nice to know. So let's go ahead and create a new shader. We're starting to actually get some serious shader stuff going on here, which is nice. So we've got a standard surface shader here. We're going to go ahead and call this what do we want to call it? Ragged edge shader, damaged object shader, ripped hole shader, ripped hole. This ripped hole shader will be responsible for doing all of our ripped hole related shenanigans. So the problem is that we need to transform it via a vertex shader for a vertex pass. So I guess we can do that. Just do almost all of my stuff has a vertex shader built right in, as you can see. We'll just do the same thing here. And here we have our input. And I don't believe that we're even going to need... I think we're just going to be modifying it in the vert pass. I don't think we're even going to use the surface pass in this case. So if we have the vert pass here, the example does not have the exact same thing that we have here, because the example doesn't even bother with this out data. In the example, we don't actually need to have an output. But what we're going to want to do here is just see whether or not we can make things work based on the vertex color. We're going to want to offset it just to see whether that's something we can do. So in order to have the vertex color, we're going to have to look up what sort of argument that is, and that's going to be here in built-in shader variables, right? It's in app data somewhere. Providing vertex data to vert programs. Fixed for color. Okay, so their example is really a little weird. So what they do is they actually they're using a fragment shader for their sample. I don't know how to get... I know how to get the color into the surface shader. I don't know how to get the color into the vertex shader. It's something really, really basic, but I don't happen to know it. App data full is what I need to know. App data full Unity. Position, tangent, normal for texture, coordinates, and color. Do you think it's just called color? Do you think that's probably what it is? If I just use v.color, is that going to... I think that it's just v.color, in which case this is pretty easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to move it along the normal based on the color. And so we're going to go ahead and do a half distance equals v.color.r. But I believe that these colors are out of 1, and we want black to be our offset. So we're going to go ahead and do it like this. We're going to rename this because I don't like having it be a reserved color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move the vertex position based on that value along the normal. So we'll just go ahead and say v.pos plus equals v.normal times dist. Is it pos, just POS, or is it position? Well, we'll know for sure in a moment. Pos is not a value, so it must be position. Nope. Position isn't part of it. v.vertex? Incompatible type. Normal is... Aren't these both three-dimensional? Why would they be different types? Let's take a look. Normal is a float 3, and position is a float 3. But... why is it incompatible? What happens if I do this? Implicit cast from float 4 to float 3. Okay, so it was casting it and it was getting all grumpy. So we're going to go ahead and apparently vertex is a float 4. So we'll go ahead and cast it, or a fixed 4 rather. We'll go ahead and cast it as a fixed 4. Cast not allowed. Okay, well then we won't cast it as a fixed 4. Implicit cast. Oh, it's a float 4. Float 4. Cast not allowed. Can I cast it if I do this? No? Yes. Yes, I can, because it doesn't actually clear those errors out. Okay, so I have been ignoring my stream for quite a while now, trying to get this stuff to work. I doubt that anybody said anything, but if I've ignored you, I apologize. Where is my stream? Did I never? Oh, there it is. Nope, I didn't ignore anybody because nobody's watching. That's fine. So what we've got now is a shader, which still has this error. God damn it. Okay, so apparently I can't cast like that. Can I cast like this? How do you cast in a shader? I guess I can just let it do its implicit cast and, you know, screw whatever is going on. Assignment of incompatible types. Okay, so there's definitely some weird-ass cast nonsense that I don't understand happening here. I don't really know why I can't cast it manually. Oh, it's still an incompatible type. Okay. So, the question is, why is a normal incompatible with a vertex position? Because those seem like they're the same damn thing. Is the normal not being stored like it says it is? Because it clearly says that the normal is being stored as a float 3. And it could be that the float 4 vertex is the problem. I mean, I can, like, float 4 offset equals, or I guess I'll just name it something like offs equals, and I can always initialize it with, I think I can do just by doing this. Is this how it works? I can't remember, but I can just go ahead and say v.normal.x, v.normal.y, v.normal.z, and 0, right? But I don't know if that's how I initialize this stuff. A comma expression where a vector constructor may have, so is it new float 4? Float 4? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So then I can always just use that, right? I don't know why I would have to do that, though, because that should be... maybe it's the times dist that is screwing it up. It's not a v.offs, it's just an offs. No, that seems to have worked. Okay, I don't know why it was refusing to cast from a float 3 to a float 4. That's kind of strange. But I went ahead and wasted a ton of your time on that. I hope you enjoyed it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a material with that. So material, ripped hull. And because I was right-clicking on a shader, it created it with the proper shader. How nice. Just drop this in. And now this should be ripped hull, right? Ripped hull, yeah. Unfortunately, it looks like I screwed up the material assignment here in Blender. So what we're going to want to do is just take a quick little look at this in material mode. Yeah, you can see how I accidentally gave it the wrong material in Blender. So this set of objects is actually not the right material, and I have to figure out a way to select it all, and that's kind of obnoxious because it is a lot of different stuff, right? It's like all over. Yeah, how annoying. I could always undo. Okay, so is this? good. So now that it's here, I can go back and tell it to make that hull the same as the rest, and then I can combine it. Boom. Perfect. And that should work. Grind, grind, grind. Good grind, 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 grind. You done? No? Still grinding? Did I create a shader which will actually cause Unity to crash? I don't know how that would happen. Or you're just taking a long time to import. No, just taking a long time to import. All right. So here you can see that what I've done is I've extruded some points along their normals, and the result is catastrophe in terms of what happens, because the verts that are sort of in the same place aren't necessarily one vert. So what I've got here is these verts, the edge is being extruded outward, and the places where you thought it was connected aren't. The entire edge has ripped away from itself, which is pretty much what I expected, because we're not actually going to be distributing these according to their normals. We're going to be distributing them according to some modulo of their world position. I just wanted to do the normals to make sure that it would work in the first place. So here, when we do this normal x, normal y, normal z, the reason I wasn't too upset about doing that is because we're not going to be using the normals. We're going to be using a modulo of their world position. Now, v.vertex is not in world position, it's in local position. We have to switch it over into world position using a cast. Now, there's a mul object to world, but I think that Unity wants you to use a different function now rather than mul object to world. There's something, they specifically mention that you should use the new something something instead. So let's just take a second and look that up. Grind, grind, grind. I guess I might have to actually manually search for the alternative, because I can't remember where I saw this, but you're not supposed to use mul object to world anymore. There's some kind of function for it. And who knows, at some point they will take away this functionality. So here we are. Well, even in the examples, they're still using this function, so maybe this is correct. They still want this to happen, so I guess I'll keep using this. This is for 2017, so it's not like it's out of date. All right, well, in that case, maybe I had it backwards and it was something else that I wasn't supposed to be using anymore, which is fine. I don't mind being wrong as long as I catch it in time. Oh, for fuck's sake, it didn't actually copy? Oh, for fuck. I already closed the damn tab. Stop doing random crap. Just give me this one line of code that I'm copying. I'll right-click, copy. Okay, I see how it is. You're just being a dick. Okay. There is a known bug where mono behavior stops allowing you to paste code. Because sometimes things make sense. Thank you, and fuck you. I don't know why this is a float 4. What would the fourth value be? Alboechi is just as surprised as I am. Yeah, that's the one big problem left with MonoDevelop. It doesn't desync anymore, or it doesn't crash anymore. It used to be a little bit crashy. Now it just sometimes won't let you paste stuff until you reboot it. How bizarre, right? So now we have the world position, and we're just going to go ahead and make that our offset. But we're going to want to modulo every single one of these. And I think that modulo is like a built-in mod, but let's take a look. Unity shader modulo. Because I think that you can use mod, but I can't remember whether mod takes a fixed for, or whether I have to pass it one value at a time. Fmod. Really? That doesn't seem right. Unity shader modulo. It's giving me like non-Unity solutions. I guess I will look at Reddit, as much as it pains me to even think that. Well, let's try typing it in and seeing whether it works. Ardinia says, "Hey Craig, I just wanted to thank you about the poor performance with GPU instancing using graphics.draw mesh instance, and radically increased his frames per second to a ridiculous number." So yeah, draw meshed instance is extremely effective. If it's not effective enough for you, there is a more effective one, but it's more difficult to use by an order of magnitude. Draw mesh instance is nice. Just keep in mind that there is no culling in draw meshed instance. So if you have a lot of stuff, you may want to cull some of it yourself, just so that you can reduce the number of calls. Right. So we're going to try and modulo this, right? Offs equals mod offs. Let's just see whether or not that barfs. It should probably end up barfing, right? Yeah. No matching for the parameters. It's actually a little bit unusual here. What is it saying? No matching to parameter intrinsic function. Possible functions are float, half double, min 10 float, 16 float, int float. Okay, so it does not take fixed fors. It only takes one value at a time. That's a shame, but we can work with it. Offs.x equals mod offs.x, comma 1, I believe. And then we just do that for y and z as well. Mul, no matching. I mean, I guess we can just do percentage. Struggling through is always fun. You're watching someone else trying to do the things that you couldn't do. So here you can see that we have a couple of things going on that are a little bit odd. Operands to percentage must be integral, because apparently 1 is not considered integral. The thing is, I don't actually want to pass it a modulo of 1, but what is it? Is 1 I? Well, let's... Is that how you specify an integer? No. Expect 1 of, comma, or... Okay, so that's not it. It's... How do you specify it as an I? Do you do that should be an integer, right? Integral. That's not the same as integer. Operands to must be integral. The modulus operator yields the remainder given by the following expression, division by 0 in blah blah blah, blah blah, integral. The modulus operator has a stricter requirement in that its operands must be of the integral type, or use fmod. I'll use fmod because, fuck you, apparently 1 isn't integral. It might be worth testing whether fmod actually allows for offs equals fmod offs. But it shouldn't. F stands for float, not, yeah. Well, the good news is there were bugs in here before I even got started. It's good to notice them before I get going. You got any arguments here? No matching parameter. Hold on, this is not what I thought it was. This is for mul, not for mod. On line 43? Yeah. Look, it's actually giving me this error and an unidentified identifier vertex. Didn't we test this and it worked? Oh. I'm just a fucking idiot. So here, this is saying that it's not a float 4, it's a float 3. I actually think that if I delete this, it'll probably work. Yeah. Okay, now we're on our way. Okay, so sorry about that. We're trying to learn. So, hey, hello, Cody1712. I'm a little bit scatterbrained today. We're working with some shader code, and it's been a little while. So let's try this. Offs equals fmod offs 1. And let's just see whether or not that barfs. Does that barf? It does not barf. All right, good. So we can get a nice ragged edge just by doing a quick little fmod. And right now it's fmod of 1, which means that it's highly cyclic. We can change that value to an arbitrary float. What do we call it? Grain, wave size, frequency. And we'll have a range of 0.1 to 5 equals 0.5f. Right? That should work. And down here, we're going to need to have that as a half frequency. And then obviously for fmod, we're going to dump in the frequency. Okay, it does want, whatever. It's all good. It's all good. All right, so that should work, and it should give us a new value in our shader that we can modify as we see fit. Now, the problem is that this remainder is going to be smaller than 1. If you drop it down below 1, it's not going to be very big. So we're going to need an amplitude as well. And obviously we're going to need the value for that here. And then down at the bottom, we're going to multiply it by amplitude. Oh, I'll just multiply it here. Oh, it turned purple. Unidentified declare amplitude. One of those values, right? The naming conventions for these are a little bit different than the ones I'm used to, so sometimes it gets confused. So this is how the ragged edge looks just as our first take. Let's go ahead and modify our ragged edge just a tiny bit to make it a little bit more convincing. And the easiest way to do that is to select this interior. We're going to go ahead and scale it up a little bit on most axes, and then extrude in a little bit on most axes. And then we can even divide this again. Now notice at this time I did divide it along the inside. So that should have a pretty considerable amount of variation. And we should see a lot more chaos. But it's going to take a while to load. So while it's loading, I'll go check on my Twitter. No, with nothing. Ha ha ha. It's fine. Close all these extra tabs down. And oh, it still hasn't loaded. This blend file needs to be winnowed out. It is too full of crap. That's fine. There we go. So there we have a rather ragged set of edges, but you can see that we do have some splitting. Now, presumably that splitting is happening on some verts that are so close that they are just triggering the fmod in the opposite direction. Like one of them is fmodding to 0 and one of them is fmodding to 0.5. I don't believe we have any more doubles. Yeah. Let's see what else is in here. Okay, so we do have a couple of other meshes in here, which is why it's so fabulously heavyweight. There are some that we can just delete, so we're just going to get rid of some of these so they stop being a bother. We don't need any of this stuff because this is the interiors, the shell elements, and that's all we need. Save this again. But I don't know how to get it to not split these verts. I want it to have a nice ragged edge, so I can't use smooth normals. I would have thought that since they are in the same place, they would be affected by the math in the same way, but it looks like there might be some floating point deviation. Doot 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 doot. Doot 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 doot. Doot 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 doot. Doot 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 doot. All right. So this is only using red as our paint, but you can see how there's definitely some damage here. And initially I thought this might be damage due to the verts actually splitting. That's definitely damage due to verts splitting. So is this. But some of them are not due to verts splitting. Some of them are due to faces swapping. If we take this amplitude down to 1, okay, you can really see where the verts split here. You see that? It's a split vert. And if we take a look, that's like right there on the mesh. If we take a closer look at the mesh, and we turn it into paint mode. What? Where's the... Why isn't it... Oh, hold on. There we are. Okay, so here you can see our paint job. I was just checking to see whether or not there was any damage to it. I don't see any damage, so I'm not sure what's happening, but I can fix that one. That one was causing us some trouble. Well, that'll fix one of the holes we have. Maybe all of the holes are due to faces being incorrectly painted. Blender is a little bit notorious for splitting verts in funny ways. So it may be that it's coming in as split even when I tell it not to, and it's got different color faces. So I just fixed this line here that you probably can't even see, but I still have this crack here, and it's probably due to them having been split. But the problem is they should be at the same world position, and therefore the math should affect them in the same way. But you can see that I did clean up that one back there. It may be that all of the holes that get punched are strictly due to paint issues. Like, it might be that one of these faces is painted a little bit less black than the other. And I mean, I could say that anything that's greater than, 0.5 is considered fully painted, but I'm really annoyed by how difficult it is to correctly paint these verts. Like, I can't see any sign that there is any kind of paint anomaly, but you can see maybe this is like a tiny bit less black. Yeah. So there is, in fact, a paint anomaly here. It's just that it's really, really hard to see. And when there is a paint anomaly, merging verts doesn't help it. There probably is a method to help paint that does force it not to paint faces, but only to paint full verts. But I don't know where that option would be. Here you can see some more damage to the inside. So if I were to switch this up to a white color, we paint that. I guess that's okay. So that should fix it. No more holes. Good, so it wasn't a float math problem. It was just the Blender coloring things funny problem. The ripped hole shader still has inconsistencies? Huh. All right, so now what we've got is a fairly solid, ragged edge. Now you can see that what I've got is, since I am modulusing the basic world position, it goes from being quite a gentle curve towards being quite sharp and then back to quite gentle. And that's on purpose because it looks ragged. I could do something that doesn't look as ragged, but it would be a little bit less ragged looking. So obviously that wouldn't be great. Now there is at least one more place that's not painted correctly. I can already see it, but I can't see it here. I can sort of see this one, but that's not actually painted incorrectly. It's just shaded incorrectly. The question is, one of these surfaces here is painted incorrectly, and that's not right. I just don't see any hints of it in terms of how the colors look. Either way, we've got our ragged edge, and what we could do if we wanted to make this a little bit more interesting or a little bit different is we could use some grays. We don't have to have everything be pitch black or not. Since this is a vertex offset, it's only as nimble as our verts are. Later on, I can go back in and add in tessellation based on any of the arguments I would like blue, for example. I don't know enough about tessellation shaders to make that happen right now, but I can tell you that this ragged outline is already better than what I was doing before. And that's kind of sad because it doesn't really look very good, but it still looks better than what it looked like before. What we still need to do, though, is arrange for some of these to be set up a little bit more properly in terms of how they look, because you can see how this is a bulge outward. I don't really like that, so we're gonna go and adjust it inward. Good enough. And then over here, we're going to do the opposite and pull it outward because it's a little bit too far in. I guess the easiest way to do it would be to hide and then grab here and then hit plus and then drag it. And then hit plus again, unhide it first. There, hit plus again, and then drag it. That should help. Yeah, that should be fine. There are some other elements that I'm probably going to have to do differently. This is my first take, and it could be, that things are not ideal. But what we're going to do now is we're going to just go ahead and modify the values that I put into the material so that I can just see how it looks with different amplitudes and frequencies. I may decide that I need to have different frequencies for X, Y, and Z. That would be a little annoying, but it's possible. Here's a ripped hull, and here's our frequency and our amplitude. So you can see that as our frequency goes down towards 0, well, you know what? It's actually interesting because the higher our frequency gets, the more jagged things are, because I don't know why. That doesn't actually make any sense to me. But we can also change our amplitude, and if we increase our amplitude, you can quite clearly see that it forms into these jagged elements. But these are all based on the world position of the object, and right now I think it's at 0, 0, 0. No, it's off in the middle of nowhere. Okay. But if we move it, you can see how it ripples. So obviously this isn't something that we can use on objects that are going to move, or they'll polymorph as they move, which would be a little bit odd. But that's not too bad. I definitely would like to try it again with a different set, because I think what the issue here is just the initial modeling needs a little bit more care. Come on, pull it in. Good? Yes? Bad? No? Come on. Load it up. Load it up. There we are. All right, so that's reasonable. Now, the thing here is that there's still some space here that I want to have look correct. And the easiest way to do that is to add in some junk meshes. The junk meshes are very cheap because I can render them as instanced on the GPU, which is nice. I believe that this is the junk mesh in question. Debris filler is a debris spawner. That's not what I want. It's the debris hardening. Yeah, edge hardening. Here it is. This edge hardening mesh has a interior structural element and just a giant wedge of metal stapled to the top. And it's like a combination element, a combo element, that in theory I can put wherever I want. It's what I was originally using as the edge, but it didn't look right as the edge because it felt kind of weird that the edges were all ripped up in weird ways. The other thing that doesn't feel right is that it is quite fat, as you can see. We're going to need to go over into the meshes and into the interiors, or the debris, junk debris, here it is. And we're going to need to make it so that this isn't as fat because it just looks bad. It's too fat. I believe that this is the guy that we're talking about. So in order to make this less fat, we're just going to scale it down on the x-axis. So we're going to just combine these two because they're linked. Scale on the z-axis by 0.1, and then we will apply that scaling. And that way, everything should keep up to date. That doesn't look kept up to date. Is it not in the correct spot? Metal wedge in junk debris. Metal wedge and metal wedge collider. I definitely changed the meshes. Must not have actually applied them correctly. Hopefully, yeah, there we are. I just didn't apply correctly. So now we've got a very, very flat wedge, as you can see. We're going to want to pull this whole thing out a little bit so that I can arrange this flat edge properly. Flat edge properly. We'll just tilt it so that it's more or less flat. There we are. And then we can just hit apply. Boom. And now when we drop this in, we can create an edge that has some structural strength to it, but doesn't actually pop up above the surface of the metal. So rather than something like this, like we had before, we can bring it down a little bit and let the edge that is being generated feel like a proper edge, while this juts out a little bit to produce some nice elements. One of the things we can do is we can assign our new material, which I think I called Riptol. Riptol. It doesn't want to take. It doesn't look like it wants to have the same color. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll live with it. But this way, in theory, we can have a structural element that fills in this edge as we need it. In practice, this may not work out. We will see. I have to try it and see what happens first. Now, one of the things I'm not doing is I'm not changing the edge here at all. And that's because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into this ripped up edge, and I'm actually going to go ahead and paint it. Now, the reason for that should be pretty obvious to anybody that's watching. I want to have some variation here, and the easiest way to do that is to use my new vertex shader. So first things first, this edge at the front, we need it to stop being quite so iconic. And the easiest way to do that is to just select it and flatten it. So we'll just grab this edge here and these elements here. And okay, so here and here, we're just going to scale that down on the y-axis until it's pretty much flat, like that. And then what we can do is subdivide it. But as you can see, I'd subdivided the wrong elements. We're going to want to subdivide like this. There we are. And that way we'll have a lot of high density stuff going on in there, and we can get some nice variation, and that should be good. But we still have one thing we need to do with these guys, and that is paint. So right now it's all white. We want this front edge to be all black. This is a little bit difficult because Blender doesn't like you to paint things in exactly the same way that you think you should be. For example, you can see here, those didn't take. So it's always a little bit difficult to get Blender to do exactly what you want it to do with the painting. It just never quite works out. Come on, seriously? So I think that's everything. And then what we can do is we can just take a little bit of a gray element to paint in here if we would like to have a little bit of a softer batch of ripples, right? As long as, yeah, it's on mix, so it's not going to end up accidentally painting full black at any point. And then over here, doop, 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 doop. Now, the only thing I really want to do that I can't seem to do very well is I want to even everything out so that the verts all have so that a vert has a color, and there's no split verts with different faces that have different colors. Alas, I do not know if there is a way to do that. Either way, that should be good enough for a first take. I may end up having to create a new debris element. We shall see. Okay, so you can see that that ends up being radically more vibrate-y. And we got a couple of options here, but the easiest thing to do is to take this ripped hole, duplicate it as a ripped edge, and then assign that to our plates, because the ripped edge can have different values, and we can reduce exactly how ripped up they are. And the way to do that is to just reduce the amplitude rather considerably. So if we just do something like this, you can see that we get a little bit of unique edge warping. It may actually still be too much if we change the amplitude, the frequency. If we move the frequency really low, you can see that we just get a little bit of ripple, and that's really what I want. There we go. Now the thing we have to do is to pull the plate up a touch, and the reason for that is simply because it was a little too close, and when it was moving down, we were actually seeing some of the underlying structural elements, and that was not great. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back in here and pull this edge and that edge in a little bit. So all right, there we are. That'll just soften it up a touch, and hopefully it'll help a little bit. And then we'll duplicate this and bring it over, turn it sideways, move it in. And there we have an edge, right? So how does that look? That's the question. Well, let's find out. Let's go ahead and apply it. And then we'll duplicate it and flip it on the y-axis. And I think that ripped hole needs to have its order changed in order to keep us from having the magic lighting issues. All right, so where were we? Where is it? Ah, there it is. Let's go on over and take a look. Only one of the edges has properly been modified, but it should be okay. We're just going to look and see whether or not this is a promising way forward. So the debris is great, seems to be working fine. And the edge seems kind of weird. What's going on? It's almost invisible. I wonder whether that's actually how I want it. That might be decent. Over here in the sunlight, it's a lot more obvious. I honestly don't know. It's tough to know how an edge should look. I think that I probably need more verts on the fundamental edge, which I can go ahead and do. But I sort of think these guys aren't adding much. And that might be just because the edge needs to be blackened. I can always add in a burned element based on a different color. So down here in the surface, I've got this albedo equals CRGB. I can take the surface color and darken this element based on the surface color. I don't remember how to get the surface color. Hold on, let's just take a look. I got it in one of these other guys, I'm sure. Yeah, color, here it is. So then down here I can just say C times equals, and then another one of the colors. So in.color, how do I spell it? Color. In.color.g. So green. So the darker the green is, the darker the surface will be. Easy enough, right? And if we go back over to our system, it should turn the edges black, as you can see. It might be a little bit too black. Maybe I should have it like at half. Basically, I'm trying to get a feel for... So the reason that this one looks a little bit better, or rather looks a little bit different, is simply because the interior, it doesn't have a gap, whereas this one you can see there's a gap. I'm just not sure what the right option is for making this look decent. It's really a little bit tough. One option is that I can paint all of the verts out here with a less red color, and then leave the edge as, or less green color, and then leave the edge, make it so that these aren't being darkened by the darkening shader I just put in. If I paint them as pure red, like this, then they will still correctly offset, but they won't be dark in terms of the actual shades. So I could just do, for example, this. The problem is that painting, vertex painting in Blender, is a tremendous pain in the ass. It's nice, but it's almost better to do UV mapping. Problem with UV mapping, of course, is that it's also not great. It's annoying to have to UV map. UV map is one of the more annoying things that you can spend your time doing. Some people really love it. They are beloved in the world of game dev. I do not really love it, but I could stand to be better at it, you know? So I'm painting this pink because that means it'll be offset slightly, but not enough to really make anything screw up. And then I'll make the next row out red, but only on the top. So only here and not here. See? They'll offset the same amount, but they won't darken the same amount, because our new darkener will only work on the channel that's green. I have this backwards. It needs to be yellow, doesn't it? It needs to be yellow. Damn it. Because otherwise we won't have any green. The problem is that yellow is not 100% green. How do I specify a color in RGB? Here it is. So we can have this as red of 1 and green of... So I have it entirely backwards. What I need is green and blue need to be 1 and red needs to be 0.5. So, wow, I painted it entirely the wrong color because I am just that smart and I want everybody to know it. So we're going to go through and repeat the same process with the correct colors. Super efficient use of everybody's time. I could sense that I was doing it wrong, but I couldn't figure out exactly how. And I know there's a couple of places I need to touch up either way. We'll get to them. I've also damaged some windows there, but I don't care. That's fine. So now what I need to do is reduce the red even further so it's like a pure baby blue. And then we need to paint the edges. Now I know that there's an easier way to do this. I just don't know what it is. Painting edges like this is a huge pain in the ass because it falls through all the time and you end up painting something you didn't intend to paint. Like there, for example. Yeah, that's fine. We can go back and do a little bit of touch-up later on as long as the basic idea is strong. Oh, come on. Paint, paint, paint. Paint, paint. Paint, 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 paint. This is marginally as exciting as doing coding, I'm sure. It looks like we screwed up on that particular surface. We'll just go ahead and brighten it up, even though it's not quite right. We'll pretend that things that are wrong on purpose. So you can see that most of our interior faces preserved their deep black hue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to properly bring this black in, and we're going to just touch up the ones that we screwed up. And then we're going to bring in this bright white hue, and we're going to touch up the ones we screwed up here. Perfect. And then here, I think these are all damaged. This bright white keeps everything exactly the way it is, and so that's good for our edges. They won't look bad. We still have a couple of places that are a little screwed up, I think. Yeah. It's a little bit hard to tell, but I'll just fix them as we see them. Now I know that there is at least one more spot that was screwed up, but I can't see it. So I guess that's fine. We'll go ahead and save that. And then we'll take a look at how it looks. Because another thing we can do is we can paint the interior lower edge a color that has a lot of red and no green. And that will make it so that it's black, but it doesn't warp. And that'll be useful if we plan to embed other things in it, because we'll have a static point where we know that it's not going to ruffle up, you know? So now that I have gone ahead and doubled it, let's go ahead and put this back as just, this is it. We'll just put this back as color.g and make it fall to the full black. There we are. So you can see that now what we have is an edge where at the edge of our edge, it just turns to pitch black. And in that way, we can end up with a rather nice, crisp edge. And it might be that that is enough even without our edge hardening plates. So let's go ahead and remove our edge hardeners and see how that looks. So if we disable them, pop, they're gone. You can see how that's really pretty stark. But if we think about the edge hardeners as edge hardeners minus the plates, like this, then what we can do is we can actually have these edge hardening plates just be structural elements that are poking out from the mass of the plate. And that could just give it a little bit of a fun edge, right? In theory. And we'll keep it square so that it feels like it's, so that it feels like it's on the same set of axes as the underlying interior meshes. So what we're doing now is we're just adding in some interior meshes. They have the same prox interior as these guys, and they also have the same basic shape. So that might work for making it look correct. And you can see that over here, where the warp happens in a different way, we can see these flat elements. See that? That flat element might look good because it kind of looks like the hull has ripped away from internal structural elements. Wow, that is a loud... Oh! Try that again with less sucking. Where the heck are we pointing? There we are. It's a little hard to see because I put a bookcase in the way. I have to remember to fix one of the pilot rings is still wrong, so I have to fix that. So here you can see all of our debris cloud. This isn't the final form of the debris cloud, but at least it looks decent. And what we're going to want to do is just take a closer look at this rippled edge. The shading is a little bit screwy here. And I don't know whether that's because the sun is set up at just the wrong angle, or whether there's something wrong with the shading on this element. I think it might just be that the sun is at the wrong angle. I'll take a look in a bit. Over here, where it punches out, Elbow Etchy is still amazed at the sheer amount of debris. Yeah, we're running a little bit slow. We're only at 60 FPS. I'll have to do a little bit of optimization with the debris, but it's not too bad. So here you can see that the edge is not very damaged in terms of looking rippled or screwed up. I may add in a texture that gets applied to damaged edges based on the blue channel. I'll have to think about that some. But when I look here, does it feel like it's a convincing ripped up edge? Well, let's go ahead and turn this whole thing around. First off, let's delete the bookshelf because we don't need a goddamn bookshelf. Now, let's pull these things around and just look at them from another angle. Elbow Etchy says, when are you going to release a test version? So the game isn't a game yet. That's the problem. I haven't settled on anything in terms of the visuals and stuff like that. So it's going to be a little while. Once I start releasing test versions, I'll probably release an update every month. But I can't really release it at this stage just because there is literally nothing. It's just a tech demo to try and show off. But if we move a little bit, you can even see that the piloting needs a ton of work before I'm ready to release it. The rippled edge kind of looks terrible in the middle there. I'll probably change how it looks in the middle. But how does it look on the edges that aren't in the middle? Well, we definitely have some errors in the lighting model. These are clearly just errors. There's no reason for that dark edge to be a dark edge. And I'm 99% sure that it's a lighting issue and not like a surface color issue. Right now we're flying through it for some reason. Not the greatest. Elbow just says, do you know a little bit better what the fuck was happening with the debris render error? No. The Q change render error, I still don't really understand it. I had a different render error that I solved by creating a new shader that was exactly the same. But in this case, we're clearly having an error here, and I think it's actually the same problem. But you can see that I don't have instancing enabled on this, so why we would be having the same error is a little bit beyond me. But basically, the one that is -30 seemed to have a lighting problem, and if we were to un-30 it, we probably no, because that, well, let's find out. Maybe I should make the ship a little bit more snappy. It's kind of sluggish right now. Yeah, you can see that there's definitely some issue here that's not... It's not a scaling issue, because we no longer have any scaling on these guys. So I'm not sure what's going on, why the lighting would screw up. You can see the lighting doesn't screw up here in scene view. It's quite fine here. Why it would screw up in game view, I'm not sure. But if I change the frequency to 2000 instead of 2001, let's see whether or not the damage goes away. I don't think it does. There's obviously something very strange going on with the render queue, and I still don't have any clues. Elboichi says, are you going to give the debris field a fuzzy edge? Yeah, the debris field already has a slightly fuzzy edge, but I'm going to definitely be really playing that up. The density of the field is... not only is it denser towards the center, it's also using larger elements, but I can easily adjust the power of the distribution. However, right now I'm very confused as to why I'm getting a weird shading error on this regardless of what I do. It doesn't seem like there should be like just a random shading error whenever there's a couple of these guys around. That doesn't seem like it's something that should happen. Now creating 4 of these is going to give us some slowdown because there's a lot of particles and they're not really optimized. But let's take this just a moment and fix up some of the elements that need to get fixed up. One is our strafe ring, which is using an alpha blended material. It needs to be using a additive material. The other thing we need to do is, I honestly don't see any shading error here in scene view, but the other thing we need to do is, I think you're right, these debris fields need to have customizable power levels for their edges. So we're going to go ahead and pop this up, and we're just going to add in a public float power level. We're going to call it edge fuzz, and we're going to make that equal to 3. And what we'll do down here is when we get this percent and we do this math.pow percent comma 2, we're going to do math.pow edge fuzz. And that will change up exactly how it works. And 3 should be enough to give us the kind of edge we want. We will find out. Either way, I can also change that up later to have different sorts of priorities. So what are we going to do now? One thing I want to check here. This. Percent times 0.5. That will really, really bring it way the heck in when our edge fuzz is this bad. So let's make it 0.8. That'll be more than enough. So let's check and see what sort of shader errors we're getting. Oh yeah, we're down to 40 frames per second. So here you can see the kind of shader error we're looking at. It's just an arbitrary blotch where the shadows don't quite work. But the strange thing is, it seems to be the same set of faces every single time. If we hit pause and we take a look at it here, you can see that it's not a problem in scene view. It's only a problem in game view. I'm not sure why that would be. why would a shader work fine in scene view, but break in game view? Yeah, again, here, it's the same faces. It's always the top edge and that one chunk right there. It works fine over here. And then it breaks over there. Let's go ahead and do a flyby of these guys. Yeah, this is definitely working fine over here. The other reason I wanted to use a different kind of edging is simply because that way I could use a better collision mask. Yeah, this one is okay too. It's got a dark blotch, but that's real shadows. What if it happened on every object that doesn't have negative scaling? I don't see that happening here. I see it working fine on the objects to the right and not on the ones to the left, even though there's nothing special about being to the left. What we're going to do is grab these guys and move them to the right. And then we're going to go take a look over there again and see whether or not the shadowing is correct. A little bit of a hard thing about this is it might not be obvious to you immediately which ones are having errors, because we are doing shadow casting, and there are some legit shadows. So I moved them, and they started to work. I don't see any issues here, or any issues. Well, I can't see down there yet, but I don't think there's any issues. I don't see the telltale signs of any issues. So, does it only fail when they're at a negative world? Of course, it only fails when they're at a negative world position. Yeah, that's what's going on here. When I find the world position, I don't absolute value it. So what we're going to do here is just absolute value it. So offs equals abs. Offs. See whether that works. And that seems to have worked. Let's see whether or not we get any shading errors here. We do, but they're different shading errors. Well, Elbow Etchy, I'm no longer looking at my dashboard because they broke the dashboard. So yes, I agree. So now that I've changed the absolute values of the world to using the absolute values of the world positions, we're having a completely different set of errors. Is this because when I move the vertex, the normals don't change? Because I change the vertex position, but the vertex normals, they don't recalculate. If I use a smaller set, just reduce that. Well, why don't I go ahead and actually do this in play mode so I can see it. Elbow Etchy says he has to actually set the stream quality down to be able to see the source again. Because the automatic quality adjustment is unable to recover the source quality once it thinks I'm unable to sustain it, and he cannot just deactivate it. That sounds like Twitch. So here we're going to go ahead and adjust some values and see whether or not we can figure out what's causing this issue. So you can see that even at an amplitude of 0.1, we do get some issue, but it's substantially worse as the amplitude goes up. When we change the frequency, the pattern completely changes. So this is clearly a problem where the normals are getting offset in a very weird way, and it's not really keeping up with that. I honestly don't know how to deal with that. I don't know anything about doing this. I think I might need to bite the bullet and do a tessellation shader, but I don't actually know how. Another thing to keep in mind is I don't really need it. If we switch this over to the simple debris shader, chord shader. If we switch this over to this, it's not too bad. If we go over here, we can always just take these guys and set them to being a machinery, and then also twist them. We can just like build in the pieces that we need ourselves. So we can just go twist, 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 twist. Now these will all be the same. So any given mesh will have the exact same edges if we do this. But I'm beginning to think that might be fine. I'm not sure that it matters. And right now I'm just breaking up the edge to try and give it a little sense of being a broken edge. Nope, too much. I'm just ripping it up a little bit using a twist. You can use a modeling twist if you'd prefer, but the whole point here is that there's really not a whole lot of complexity to this. I'm just trying to rip the edge up a little bit manually because I'm no longer doing it via a shader. And with this, since I'm no longer doing it via a shader, the normals will be correct and I won't have to manually calculate them. So when I do this, we should see that all of these now have the same ragged edge. Come on, finish loading. There we are. And you can see that now they're quite ragged, and they're all ragged in the exact same way. If we hit play, we shouldn't have any more normal issues. They should all be lit correctly, even though we are down to 40 frames a second. Yeah, they're all lit correctly now. So the question that I started the day with was, how can I make the edges look convincing? Now that I've gotten this far, the answer seems to be the exact same way that you used to make edges convincing, just live with it. But the core issue that I have is simply that, well, first off, the way I modeled this is not good. I'll have to redo the edge, but that's pretty easy. But the issue is when I'm trying to create convincing edges, I was going to save a lot on the density by using repeating elements, but I can't use repeating elements because repeating elements have to always be the same mesh. So I was going to try and create an edge using a shader, but if I try and use a shader to tatter up the edge, it's going to have to be another kind of shader. I don't... this kind of shader is not going to cut it. Got to do a tessellation shader, and I don't know how that... Yeah, I think it's because I'm using the wrong kind of shader, Elbow Etchy. I just need to use a tessellation shader instead, but I'm not sure that there's a lot of support for tessellation. I'm also not sure there's a lot of support for GPU instancing, but either way, I can manually create ripped edges in a way that looks pretty decent, and that might be what I have to do. The question is, what goes inside of those ripped up edges? And the answer seems to be these guys. Now, the question I have is, do I want to have these guys have some sort of uniqueness? If these guys are a little bit unique, then will that be enough to make it feel like you're not seeing the same thing over and over? Do I even have to bother with that? Because maybe it's fine the way it is. I don't really know. I do know that I'm going to have to redo the edges. The edges I've got right now are clearly not going to work out. So this is how it looks right now, this very instant. And that's not shameful. I can probably live with this kind of visual. I just think I can do better, and I know I can do better. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how. And the first step is going to be better edge creation. Now, I have worked with this kind of edge a lot, but there is an alternative. I can use tiled hulls. I can use like meter by meter tiles, or they'd be like 5 meter by 5 meter in this case. And then the tiles, those can be like, 2 or 3 different tile meshes, mostly intact to very tattered. And all I would show here would be the actual frame underlying the tiles. Let's go ahead and try to model. Oh, it's already 5:10. Let's go ahead and try and model that. What we're going to do is delete this built-in edge that we've got because it's wrong. Come on, there we are. Boom, boom, boom. Delete all those faces. They're gone. We're back to the original edge we had. Now, I can model an edge in the way that I would like, but what I would like to do is actually model in some hull struts. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and decide on what our hull struts should be. And I think that we're going to want to create them as a grid. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create a new object that's going to turn into armor plating struts. I think that starting as a cube is probably fine. Then we'll scale everything down by quite a bit, like scale on everything but the y-axis. 0.1. Even that's probably too big, so scale everything with the y-axis point. Oh yeah. And if we're looking at how big these things are, I think that it's probably fine if they look like that big. And then what we'll do is we will go ahead and grab Y, or just even cut there like this, right? We can extrude across, turn on clipping. Well, I didn't really do that right, did I? That, right? And that would be like a frame that you could repeat over and over and over as a whole element. So we can just go ahead and add in an array modifier and another array modifier that is on another axis. And you can sort of get the feeling for what this whole element would look like. We bring back the guy we're working on and move this hole into place. It's too small. Well, let's just take a look here. So you can see what we do is we would have elements that were we'd just have it, instead of ending on this ragged edge, we would end it squarely on this object. And I would just do clean cuts around in, square shapes. And then we'd have these guys poking out. And I'd create like ragged versions of them. But this is much too small. It'd be like this size. And so we would have a nice set of ragged edges, and then we could slot in tiles algorithmically so that we could allow ourselves to have any sort of combination of torn off elements. That's actually going to take some testing. I'm not ready to do that right now. I'd think about it a little bit more, but I think that it would work out, and I think it might look best. It would certainly allow us for the most variation and the most explanation. When you see panels getting ripped off, you're going to be okay with that. On the other hand, a ragged hull edge is a little bit hard to manage because you got a lot of questions as to exactly how it should shear off. If it's individual panels, then whatever, right? The panels pop off however they're going to pop off. But if you're cutting into a solid hull, it's a lot more hard to be convincing. So I think that's what I'll do. I will have this idea, I'll work it out a little bit, probably do some stuff off screen, and come back on Sunday and try and get this under control. I would like to move on to actually creating like things that people can interact with and, you know, release an interactive thing. But I can't do that until I have a basic idea of how these large objects that get ripped apart should look. And the answer is they shouldn't look like this. They should look better than this. So I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to have to figure out the best way to make them look better than this. And the next thing I want to investigate is tiles. So I might not make them square, but square is nice because then they can distort. We can rotate them 90 degrees on any angle. Whereas if they are rectangular, then they can only be rotated 180 degrees. Well, those are the things I have to think about, and I'll have them thought out by Sunday. Thank you very much, and I will see you folks later. Sorry that I basically wasted your time today, but at least you got to hear someone boring talk at you for a long time.